for the second part of the experiment, we're going to determine the density of an unknown solid. And so this is after you've done the first part with the liquid. When you do the first part with the liquid, you also had determined the volume of the flask using water, and you already have the mass of the flask. So I just copied those from the last part. If you're not sure how to get the volume of the flask, you need to go back to the density of the liquid video. But anyway, so it's the same flask, and I'm going to fill it with some kind of beads, and I'm just going to show it. Most of the time you don't fill it completely. It doesn't have, you don't have enough, but there are gaps in there that the solid doesn't fill. Anyway, and then you weigh it with the beads, and that allows you to determine the mass of the solid. So there are a lot of steps to this. I'm going to number them. So the first thing, we can figure out the mass of our solid. So we have the mass with the solid in, and then we're going to subtract the mass of the flask that we had from before. Okay, so we have the mass of the solid, and of course we're going for density. And the mass of the solid is pretty easy. It's the volume of the solid that we need that's a little trickier, because you can't, these are beads, or they're not square. You can't just determine their volume easily. So what we do is we use a little trick with water, and that is we take our flask that has the solid in it and we weight it, and then we're going to add water, and the water is going to fill in all of these gaps in between, so that all of the volume that is not occupied by solid is going to have water in it. Okay. So next we can figure out how much water fit. So we were given the mass of the whole thing, and we're going to subtract the mass of the flask and solid. Oops, that's a 0. And now we know the mass of water that fit in there. Well, like before, if we know the mass of the water, then we can figure out the volume of the water. And we do this using the density of water that will be given. Well, now we know the volume of the water, and that will let us get to the volume of the solid. And that's because the entire flask is filled with solid and water. We know the volume of the entire thing. We've got the volume of the water, so we can subtract and get the volume of the solid. So what we're using is this. So the volume of the flask that we determined before, back when we were doing our liquid, and we're going to subtract the volume of water that it took to fill in the cracks, and that will give us the volume of our solid. Okay, and then our last step, we said the density of the solid is equal to the mass of the solid divided by the volume of the solid. And we have those two numbers now. Watching our sig figs, our volume only has 3 sig figs. And there's our density of our solid.